Good morning, everybody. Back in April 2025, I made my initial thoughts video on this cooler, and now after having used it for a full season of camping, I'm going to tell you what I really think about it. If you want a more detailed look at this cooler, my initial video is linked in the description below. We'll start with a couple examples I made note of while using it this past summer. The first I want to talk about was actually my first time using this cooler. It was on a 7-night road trip at the end of May. The outside temperatures were mostly in the low 60s during the day and the mid 40s overnight. And at this time, I only had one battery for the cooler. Before we left, I pre-chilled it with the cooler plugged into the wall at home. After 72 hours, the battery life was at 25%, and that was without charging it at all. At that point, I switched the cooler from smart mode to eco mode, and for some reason, I feel like the battery started dropping a little bit faster after that. Not sure why. The outside temperatures were still about the same. After 84 hours, the battery life was at 16%. Nevertheless, that's pretty great that we were able to use the cooler for 3.5 days without having to plug it in or charge it at all. The second time I want to talk about was on a 3-day trip in July. We left the house in the evening with the battery at 100% and the cooler pre-chilled to 37 degrees. After 2.5 to 3 hours of driving, we stopped at a rest area and the battery life was only at 73%. Not good. And then the next morning, so about 12 hours after leaving the house, the battery life was only at 50%. This was kind of concerning, and we did have this happen a couple of times, and I'm not sure why. Normally, we would leave for a camping trip in the evening, and after about 2.5 to 3 hours, the battery would still be in the 90s. So I'm not sure what happened these couple of times, but we're going to move on and just talk about some of the performance of the cooler. So talking about the performance of this cooler, first of all, it cools very fast. I never did a time test this time around, but it cools very quickly. I would usually set it to either 37 or 38 degrees. One of the reasons this is so important is if you want to just load your cooler and pack it up right as you're ready to leave for your trip, you don't have to worry about the food not being cold in the cooler. But I do recommend pre-chilling the cooler just to save on the battery. Just like with any cooler, the hotter it is outside, the worse it's going to perform. So on hot days, you definitely want to just keep an eye on the battery life. There were several times we used it in 90+ degree temperatures. I installed a solar panel on the roof, so what I would try to do is park in the sun and just plug it in while we were doing whatever we were doing that day, and that worked very well for me. Just keep in mind that one battery will probably not last a full 24 hours if you're in 90+ degree temperatures. Regardless of the temperature outside, I always found that the temperature inside the cooler always stayed stable. I never found that the food was either too warm or too cold. I know some of you might want to know about the noise level of the cooler, and I can't really speak on that too much because I keep it in the truck bed. So either I'm driving and I can't hear it because it's in the truck bed, or when we're sleeping up in the tent, it's down below us in the truck bed. But if you do have a rooftop tent and your cooler is going to be in the truck bed like mine is, you don't have to worry about noise being an issue in that case. I've talked a bit about battery life already, as that is one of the most intriguing features of this cooler, kind of what makes it stand out. Again, I always charge the cooler with my 100-watt solar panels, so in full sun that would give about 65 watts of charge, but that speaks more to the efficiency of the solar panel, not the battery of the cooler. Also, I just got the second battery for the cooler, but I did not have it for this past camping season, so I am very much looking forward to using it in this next camping season, and it is supposed to, in fact, double the battery life of the cooler. When I had the first version of this cooler, I had the 53 liter, so I had dual zones. I like the 40 liter version better because the size is better for me, and there is better battery life because the 40 liter and the 50 liter, they use the same battery, so the 40 liter has less volume to cool, so better battery life. One downside though without the dual zones is I'm never going to use this as a freezer. With the dual zones, you can set one side as a fridge, one side as a freezer. I'm never going to be going on a camping trip where I'm only going to need a freezer and not need a fridge. So basically, I don't have a freezer anymore. So keep in mind, if you're going to need a fridge and a freezer, you might want to get one with dual zones. Having a powered cooler in general, whether it's battery powered or not, is amazing because not having to worry about ice ever again is the best thing ever when camping. For the two of us, the 40 liter version was big enough for 2 7-day trips even, as long as we packed carefully. Of course, this cooler as a whole is going to be bigger than a non-powered cooler or even a powered cooler that doesn't have the batteries because obviously it needs the space for those batteries. But that's a trade-off that's worth it for me. The flip-up table, that's something that I actually use more than I thought I would. You can use it as a cutting board or I even use it as a table to eat on. and then that way you still have access to the cooler door. And now I need to tell you a story to describe its durability, and I really wish I got this on video. We were hanging out at a lake one afternoon, and I had the back of the truck open. I was facing away from the back of the truck towards the lake eating a roast beef sandwich. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crashing noise. I turned around and it was the worst case scenario. Turns out I was parked on a slight slant and the cooler had fallen 4 to 5 feet off my deck drawers, onto my truck bed, and onto the ground. I was devastated, thinking that was the end of this cooler. There's no way a cooler like this with electrical components was going to survive that fall. Well, guess what? It survived the fall, and this happened in June, so I still got tons of use of the cooler after that happened. I never had any issues with the cooler after this incident. The only evidence is this battle scar right here. That is a true story and honestly really impressed me. I just did not think it was going to survive. Other than that, obviously I use it on some bumpy roads and it's fine with that. I now use the T-mat blockers to keep it secure. I did not have those back in June when that fall happened. After each trip we go on, I spray it down just to keep it clean. And lastly, I just want to talk about the app real quick. In the past, I have said that with power stations and the other version of this cooler, that I've just never really had any interest in using the app, but that has changed. I actually use the app a lot, mostly to check the battery life and then the solar input voltage, and it gives me all the information I need. It connects very quickly. It's quite handy, actually. We're almost done, but before I wrap up, I just want to talk about anything that I could think of that I would want changed or maybe slightly differently with this cooler. There's not much I would want changed, but the biggest thing I could think of, if I could pick one thing, would just be to have it be lighter weight. Even with that, I wouldn't want the insulation reduced or the battery life reduced or anything like that, but it is quite heavy. Just consider that the cooler alone, this 40-liter version, weighs about 50 pounds, and then each battery weighs about 5 pounds. So if you're using the cooler with 2 batteries, without even having any food or drinks in there, you're looking at 60 pounds. If you're traveling solo and you're going to need to be able to lift the cooler in and out of your vehicle, you could be looking at over 100 pounds depending on how full you have it. The only other things I could think of are pretty minor. The solar charging port on the first version of this cooler was on the battery itself, and on the second version it's actually built into the cooler. Not really a big deal. This never was an issue for me, but it just means that you can't take the battery out and plug the battery into solar. You just have to make sure that you can plug the cooler as a whole into the solar. Also with the solar charging, I found that it can be kind of slow. Again, with my 100-watt panel, you get about up to 65 watts. I was going to add a second 100-watt panel to my roof to give it 200 watts, but then I read that the maximum solar that the battery can handle is 100 watts. So just keep in mind that if you are using solar to charge the cooler, it sounds like it's only rated to handle up to 100 watts. Lastly, another minor thing, but it is a little bit of a flaw. The button to push right here to check the battery life is not accessible when opening this little cover. You have to take off the entire battery cover to push this button. The smaller cover should have been extended just a little bit so the button would be accessible. Sometimes I just want to push the button to see how many lights are lit up. I don't want to have to take off the whole cover. This really only matters to me because the cooler sits up high on my deck drawers, so I can't see the top screen to see the actual battery percentage. So it'd just be nice to have a little easier access to that button. In conclusion, if this cooler fits within your budget, it is absolutely worth it. I love everything about this cooler except for maybe how heavy it is. Just consider what size you might need. We tried Pack Smart. Instead of putting food that we were bringing with us in Tupperware, we would put it in bags to take up less space. When putting drinks in there, we would just put a couple drinks at a time and then restock as we go to save space in there. In terms of performance, battery life, durability, and reliability, I am in love with this cooler and it has become one of my favorite pieces of camping gear. If you are going to buy one, my advice would be to get it on sale because I've noticed that they have sales a lot. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below and I will do the best I can to answer. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.